everyone, welcome to another interview on behalf of the Canadian Science and Policy Conference in 2018. I'm joined today by Joseph Tafese, and I understand that you've recently contributed to a panel with regards to science and inclusivity. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you for
taking the time for this. So I guess let's get started. If you could tell me a little bit about your background and your kind of general position, how you see yourself as kind of unique in the idea of science policy, and what are some of the major kind of challenges or things that are on your mind right now?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I'm a software engineering student with a minor in cognitive sciences at the University of Waterloo. And I think what sets me apart is that I've lived in 3 different countries. So I was born in Ethiopia, I grew up in Kenya, and now I'm in Canada. And so growing up, I've been able to see different aspects of the human life, the human experience, and being able to interact with people who I think bring a cent or two into the conversation as a whole. And I love engineering. I love writing code. I love solving problems. And being in that situation in particular, I think, is what sets me apart from, I guess, the rest of my cohort. But the connection with SHAD itself is the reason why I'm here right now. So SHAD is a program that I've been affiliated with for a while. I'm a SHAD fellow. Did a SHAD program 2 years ago. And I just met the most amazing, cool people as I've ever seen in my life, especially in Canada, in that particular setting. And just how we interacted, how greatly we disagreed, but how beautifully we came together and actually created something meaningful that was able to create meaningful impacts to people's lives and actually solve problems was an experience that I cherish for the rest of my life. And so when they asked, you want to come participate in the panel at the CSPC, I thought, who wouldn't? It's a really good idea, and that's where I'm at.
And I like that a lot, what you were saying about the idea of being able to disagree and yet still come to terms. And I feel like in a current kind of modern era, that's not that common to find. So
no.
What do you think about that? What kind of allowed you to do that?
Well, initially, we had 64 people in our cohort who were put together who look at life very differently. Some of them follow the Freudian and Jungian, psychology theorems. We all approach life from maybe a religious or non-religious, from a cultural or non-cultural, from a Western or Eastern. There's so many different perspectives that came into it, but we had to live together. And we had to work in groups, and we had to create something cool and unique and bring in our creativity and live into the spirit of community. And we had to have those nuanced and detailed conversations because that was the only way about it. There was no way we could just assume that everything was going to work out. We really had to work hard at it. And it just builds on to the idea of companies as a whole and university. We are encouraged to work together and create new things. But it's really, really hard, right? It doesn't come by easy. And sometimes companies put up stats and they go, well, we have this many women and this many African Americans and this many indigenous people. But what I find is that it doesn't really mean much to have a seat at the table unless you're actually contributing and people are understanding what you're saying, right? So when it comes to diversity and inclusivity within a professional setting, it's literally the difference between qualitative and quantitative analysis, right? You can quantify diversity, you can measure it, you can count it, but you really can't quantify inclusion. It's something that you feel, it's something that you have to work hard at. It's not something that you just see and it's not flashy, but it's what creates results. An example we gave at the panel was the scientific method, right? In the Canadian Science Policy Conference, we have the scientific method, which is pretty much based on the Socratic method on questioning, right? So you got to ask questions. You formulate a hypothesis, you test it. If it fails, well, reformulate. If it passes, do it again, make it replicable. But the whole process revolved around asking questions. But how are you supposed to ask questions if you're only starting from one particular perspective, right? If you don't have a wide enough array of views and opinions and a cultural base to start from, how is it that you can ask questions that are relevant to solving the problems in your own community? And that was one of the biggest revelations I had at SHAD and moving on forward in life itself, is if I really do not understand what the problem is, there's no way I can ask the right questions, there's no way I can solve it. And when it comes to, life as in general, and for me as an engineer coming back, it's the problems that we try to solve are not just problems that are limited in scope, right? They're not ideal solutions. They're things that have multiple moving parts, and I have to talk to people and get their perspective and understand what exactly the problem is and what solutions would best work. There's no way I can do that if I don't listen. There's no way I can do that if I do not include these people and actually have a nuanced and detailed conversation. Because it's not going to work if I just shove down a solution down their throat and hopefully it works, right? And I think that's one of the main things that come out of that.
Right, very interesting. So then in that kind of context, coming into a conference like this that's focused very much on science policy, how do you see that moving forward in terms of an actual kind of policy setting? And I know that there's a number of different movements with regards to policy in different directions, but do you see any as working much more effectively than others, or kind of how Canada's positioning itself as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, so Justin Trudeau started this youth council, and one of my panelists or co-panelists was actually on the youth council for the last 2 years, and she was talking a lot about how the different perspectives the discourse that was brought up by the conversations that they were having is actually being used to implement the upcoming, I think it's called the inclusivity policy or something to do with inclusion within the STEM fields. I mean, in a larger context, you can see that how we approach science and how we regulate it is very, very deterministic of what outcomes we get. And so if we're trying to reach the widest scope of problems and provide the solutions that actually tackle the root problems, we can embed that within how we approach it itself. Psych studies and research cases have to do what's called an ethics clearance, right? And that's an example of a policy that was put forward to make sure that people are not being infringed on their rights and that this actually is humane, to some extent. And there's policies that are coming up that are around that. And I think the trajectory that Canada's taking is really good. And SHAD and its counterparts coming into the CSPC really provide the context and the importance and really exemplify and live into the spirit of inclusion and community within science and how to best reach our objectives and goals that we're trying to go forward with in our all pursuit of knowledge and our quest for deeper understanding of the world around us, which is really, really fueled by, again, how we set up the environment around us. And I think that's where CSPC comes in.
Excellent. Well, that's very good to hear that CSPC has the ability to contribute nicely to that.
Oh, yes.
So then, as an engineer and as someone with a very technical mindset in terms of problem solving, how do you kind of see that applying into a field that's a little more personal and kind of thing when it comes to policy and a number of different avenues like that?
Do you mind clarifying what you mean by that?
Sorry?
Do you mind clarifying what you mean by that?
Yeah, that as an engineer, you have a very kind of technical background, you have a very kind of problem-solving mentality. So do you see that being a contribution to something like policy, or do you see that being a kind of different avenue?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the technical aspect of my job is actually what lets me know if something is feasible or not, or if I can actually reach these, right? Because if I was told as an engineer that I had to adhere to a policy that required me to listen to everybody at the table, it's really hard for me to do that and also do my job, right? And so creating an environment where the people can be listened to, the people can express what it is that they want to be solved. I mean, it could be clients, it could be communities, it could be countries that I'm dealing with. But to be able to have that conversation to be had and that every voice is kind of incorporated into the fabric of what we're trying to get to, and then get that presented to me as part of the problem itself, right? Because more often than not, when we get problems, it's given to us in the sense that it's already been translated from English to logic for the most part, right? And so the level of ambiguity that we have to deal with and the number of decisions that we have to make to actually solve that particular problem does not necessarily include the nuances of what it started out with. And so we lose a bit of that the complexity of the problem itself the moment we get it. But if we were to incorporate the complexity of the problem within the logic that we're trying to incorporate it with, maybe hidden premises or things that we should know or we should preserve to be true while moving forward with our state, would be very, very useful, right? And sure, it might not necessarily affect how I interact with the people who I'm working with, but it definitely affects the quality and the viability of the solutions that we make, right? Because you get a wider base to start with, you have more information, you always want more information because then it really does a good job of guiding where you go with your solutions that you come up with cohorts or by yourself.
Excellent. Well, very interesting. I very much enjoyed your panel today. It was very cool to see as it kind of played out and the various backgrounds and how everybody was able to interact together. So,
thank you so much.
As a last kind of note, is there, for our viewers, is there anywhere that they could find a little more information about you or about the SHAD group as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, SHAD has a website, it's called shad.ca, and it has all the information. I think they just closed the applications for their next year, so I'm sorry if you missed those. And I'm personally on LinkedIn at Joseph Tafese, or my website, jetafese.com. And then you can find all the information there, the projects I'm on. I've got everything that you need to know about me.
Great, excellent. Well, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. We appreciate it.